Highway 666 stretched for miles through a deserted area where dense trees framed the winding roads. It had long gained a bad reputation among drivers, who avoided the highway even during the day. There were legends among the locals about a strange black pickup truck that stalked cars, causing drivers to lose control. But no one could clearly explain what exactly was happening on this road. Sarah, a young journalist, was looking for new material for her article. She specialized in mystery stories and always wanted to find something that made the blood run cold. When she heard about Route 666, she decided to investigate the legend. It was the perfect combination of eerie atmosphere and mystery that could make her article popular. Sarah's first stop was a town not far from the highway. She talked to the locals, who were not very open to conversation. One of the men, an old mechanic named George, agreed to tell her what he knew. "I saw it with my own eyes," George said, wiping his hands on a dirty rag. "This black pickup truck shows up without warning. It rumbles like thunder, and there is no way to escape. No one knows where it comes from, but everyone who sees it remembers it for the rest of their lives." Sarah wrote down his words, but she felt that he was hiding something. She asked him if there was any history associated with the track, but George just shook his head. "You don't want to know. Just stay away." Despite the warnings, Sarah decided to go to the track herself. She had prepared everything she needed: a map, a voice recorder, a camera, and a small tent in case she had to stay overnight. Her car, an old sedan, didn't look too reliable for the task, but Sarah was confident in her preparation. When she hit the highway, the first few miles were ordinary. The roadside was overgrown with weeds, and the trees formed a tunnel through which light could barely penetrate. But gradually something changed. The air grew heavier. The car radio began to pick up only static, and Sarah noticed that the asphalt seemed too dark, as if it was absorbing light. The road was almost empty, and only occasionally did she see lonely road signs warning of sharp curves. Sarah stopped on one of the roadsides to take some photos. She tried to capture the atmosphere of the highway, its dark hue and the dense forest that surrounded the highway on both sides. When she turned back to the car, her heart leapt. There was a small branch on the windshield that had fallen, but it looked like it had been placed on purpose in the shape of an arrow pointing forward. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. She decided to continue driving, but now she was wary. After a few miles, she noticed the headlights that had appeared in the distance behind her car begin to approach rapidly. The headlights were unusually bright. Sarah increased her speed, but the headlights continued to approach. She could hear the roar of the engine, even though the road seemed empty. In her rearview mirror, she saw a black pickup truck that looked like it had been banished from another time. Its body was shiny and its headlights blinded her. "Is this a joke? Is someone trying to scare me?" she said, keeping her hands on the steering wheel. But the pickup truck didn't stop. It got so close that Sarah felt her car's engine start to stall. She tried to pull over, but the steering wheel felt heavy, as if the car no longer obeyed her. Her heart pounded as the pickup drove past and disappeared around the bend, leaving only the sound of the engine fading into silence. Sarah stopped and tried to regain her composure. But deep down, she knew this was not just a meeting. Something was waiting for her on that highway, and she hadn't yet learned the whole truth. Sarah sat in her car, trying to calm her breathing. Her hands were still shaking after the encounter with the black pickup truck. She took a deep breath several times and began to look around the neighborhood. The road was empty, surrounded only by thick trees that created an oppressive atmosphere. It was strange that the pickup truck had disappeared so suddenly, leaving only silence behind. She decided to pull over to the side of the road and watch the recording on the camera that was mounted on the dashboard. As she rewound the tape, Sarah saw the headlights of a pickup truck appear behind her and quickly approach. But as soon as it disappeared around the bend, the camera stopped capturing the image, showing only static noise. "That's impossible," she whispered, feeling her anxiety grow. The camera was in good working order, and this had never happened before. But now she had proof that something unusual had happened. Determined to continue, Sarah started the car and drove down the highway. The road grew darker and the trees thicker. It seemed to her that even the moonlight could barely penetrate the branches. The radio in the car began to pick up strange signals, soft whispers and fragments of old songs that she couldn't recognize. Sarah turned it off, but the silence was even more depressing. On the side of the road, she spotted an old gas station. The lantern over the entrance was barely lit, and the building looked abandoned. Sarah decided to stop, hoping to find someone who could tell her more about the highway. As she opened the car door, a chill hit her, as if the air had suddenly become icy. She cautiously approached the gas station. It was dark inside, with only faint light coming through the dirty windows. There were old newspapers on the counter. Sarah picked one up and read the date, 1965. The headline on the front page caught her attention. "Mysterious incident on the highway. Local resident Henry Jones is missing." "Henry Jones," she repeated, remembering that she had heard the name from one of the townspeople. He was the man who was accused of blocking the construction of the road. Legend has it that his pickup truck remained on the road as a symbol of his anger. When Sarah returned to the car, she noticed something strange: tire tracks on the road that disappeared into the distance. They looked fresh, as if a black pickup truck had just driven by. Her heart beat faster. She got behind the wheel and decided to follow the tracks, even though it was foolish. Something about this story was pulling her further. The tracks led her to an old bridge that spanned a narrow stream. The bridge looked unreliable, and its planks creaked under the weight of her car. When she stopped in the middle of the bridge, her car's headlights suddenly went out and the engine stopped. "Not now," Sarah whispered, trying to start the car. But instead of the sound of the engine, she heard something else: the loud roar of an engine coming from the darkness. The headlights of a black pickup truck lit up in the distance, and it began to move slowly toward her. Sarah felt a chill go down her spine. The pickup was getting closer, and its headlights were blinding her. She got out of the car, hoping to find shelter, but the bridge creaked and swayed under her feet. The pickup stopped a few meters away. Its engine was running loudly, but there was no sign of the driver. Sarah took a few steps back, feeling that she needed to stay away from this car. But suddenly the pickup turned off the engine, and everything around her plunged into silence. She felt something invisible start to approach and started to run back down the road, leaving the car behind. There was only one question in her mind: what kind of force was driving this car, and why did it choose her? Sarah ran down the dark road without looking back, her heart pounding and the sound of the engine still echoing in her ears. The fog that had suddenly descended on the highway made every step difficult and uncertain. She stopped to catch her breath and realized that the pickup truck was no longer following her. But the fear did not disappear. Something about this place felt wrong. In the distance, Sarah saw a faint light. It was an old roadside motel, almost hidden among the trees. She walked closer, hoping to find shelter and a place to make a phone call. Inside the motel, it was silent. The lobby was half dark, with only an old lamp flickering in the corner. An elderly man stood behind the desk. His face was wrinkled and his eyes were deeply sunken, but he didn't look hostile. "Are you from the highway?" he asked without looking up. Sarah nodded. Something strange happened. There was a black pickup truck. It was following me. The man shook his head. "You're not the first, and I'm afraid you won't be the last." He showed her an old scrapbook with newspaper clippings and photographs. All of them were related to the highway. People were talking about a mysterious pickup truck that appeared out of nowhere. Some of them were drivers who claimed that the pickup had forced them off the road. It started when they built the highway here, the man continued. One man, Henry Jones, was against its construction. His pickup truck was his pride, and he didn't want his family's land destroyed. But one night changed everything. He was found on the highway, or rather, what was left of him. Sarah felt a chill go down her spine. You mean this is his pickup truck? The man nodded. They say his anger is still here. The pickup is just his shadow, a reflection of what happened. And now he appears every time someone disturbs this land. Sarah decided she couldn't just run away, leaving the story untold. She asked her husband if there was a way to stop it. He showed her an old map that marked the spot where Henry's house once stood. If you want to try, go there. But be prepared. This place is unforgiving. Sarah set off to the marked spot. The road was even more gloomy than before. The forest became denser and the fog even heavier. When she reached the ruins of the old house, she was surrounded by a silence that seemed unnatural. Among the remains of the house, Sarah found an old pickup truck. It stood there like a statue, covered in rust and moss. But even in its stillness, it seemed alive. She found the keys and an old photograph in the cab, with Henry next to the pickup and a caption, "This is my land, and no one can take it away." Suddenly, the air grew colder, and the shadows around her began to move. Sarah felt her fear return, but she knew she had to act. She got into the pickup and put the key in the ignition. The engine started, and the sound was so loud that it seemed as if it had shaken the highway itself. The pickup's headlights illuminated the road in front of her, but also something else. Henry's figure standing in the distance. He was looking at her, but his gaze was full of pain, not anger. Sarah realized that Henry just wanted his story to be heard. She spoke out loud. "I know what happened. I will bring you back to peace." The shadows began to dissolve, and the pickup truck became quiet. The world around her became brighter, and Sarah realized that she had made the right choice. But the question remained, was it really over? Sarah sat in silence, feeling the shadows dissolve around her. The pickup truck stood still, and the engine quieted down, as if it no longer needed to burn in anger. She looked at the photo of Henry that remained in her hands and realized that this moment was the key. Henry just wanted his story to be heard and his memory to be honored. Sarah carefully placed the photo on the seat of the pickup truck. "This is yours," she whispered. She stepped out of the cab, and as soon as her feet touched the ground, the air around her grew warmer. She felt a heavy burden lifted from her shoulders. The sounds of nature began to appear around her. The rustling of leaves, the singing of night birds, and even the distant sound of a stream. Everything that had seemed frozen in time began to come alive. Sarah looked at the pickup truck, and it began to look older, losing its intimidating aura. It was just an ordinary rusty car, no longer a threat. At dawn, Sarah returned to her car, which miraculously started working again. She did not know if it was some kind of Henry's power or just a coincidence. But when she left the old house, she felt that the road was different. The fog had cleared, and the sun's rays flooded the highway with soft light. She stopped on the side of the road to make a few notes in her notebook. This story was worth telling. She decided to write not only about the legend, but also about Henry himself, his struggle for the land, and the injustice that had left him tied to this place. Back in the city, Sarah went to a local cafe where she met the old man again, who showed her the album. "You made it," he said with a faint smile. She didn't know how he knew, but his words were confirmation that it was over. "I think Henry has found peace now," she replied. The old man nodded. "Maybe, But the road never forgets. There will always be those who want to know more than they need to. Sarah left the town feeling relieved, but also a little uneasy. At the last turn before leaving Highway 666, she saw headlights in her rearview mirror. They were faint and flickering, as if a ghost of the past had decided to make itself known for a moment before disappearing forever. This story left a mark not only on the highway, but also in her heart. She knew she would never come back here again, but the memory of this road would stay with her forever. Sarah continued on her way home, leaving the cursed highway behind her. A sense of relief mixed with a strange inner unease. She thought about Henry, about his struggle, and how injustice had forced him to remain tied to this place. His anger no longer frightened her. Now she saw it only as pain. A few days after her return, Sarah finished writing her article. Her story was filled with details, but it was not limited to the legend of the black pickup truck. She told the story of a person who lost everything and became a victim of circumstances. Her article was emotional, and the editor approved it for publication, anticipating great reader interest. The night before publication, Sarah was sitting at her laptop, reviewing the last edits. A strange sound outside her window caught her attention, a faint grumbling sound, like an engine running. She looked out into the yard, but saw nothing, only the shadows of the trees swaying in the wind. She went back to work, but the feeling of unease remained. When she heard the sound again, this time closer, her heart pounded. She gathered her courage and went outside with a flashlight in hand. The yard was empty, but she could see tire tracks on the asphalt leading to the road and disappearing into the darkness. Sarah didn't know if it was a coincidence or something more. She decided to return to the house, convincing herself that it was her imagination playing tricks on her. The next morning, the article was published. It quickly gained popularity, sparking interest in the legend of Highway 666. Sarah received messages from readers thanking her for exposing the truth. But among these messages was one anonymous one. The road will always find new travelers. She read it several times, trying to figure out who could have sent it. But a feeling grew in her soul that it was not just a coincidence. In the last scene, Sarah is driving along a regular highway late at night. The radio in the car suddenly starts picking up static. She tries to tune it out, but all she hears are fragments of old songs. For a minute, she thinks she sees headlights in the rearview mirror. But when she looks back, the road behind her is empty. Sarah takes a deep breath and keeps driving, trying to ignore her fear. But in the distance, on the horizon, lights are flashing subtly, and the faint sound of a motor can be heard in the air again. Highway 666 has not yet finished its story.